השתבח שמך לעד, מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש, בשמיים ובארץ, כי לך נאה לזמר. השתבח שמך לעד, מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש, בשמיים ובארץ, כי לך נאה לזמר. אל מלך יחיד, אל חיי העולמים, השתבח שמך לעד.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נסע בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא עובד והוא יהיה בתפארה והוא אחד ואין שני להמשילו להכבירה בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ללא העוז והמשרה והוא אלי וחי גואלי וצור חבלי בעצה והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוסי ביום אקרא בידו אפקיד וכי בתשען והעירה ואם וכי גבייתי השם לי ולא יראה
Famine drove them from the land, and so Naomi's husband moved his family to Moab. Naomi's husband had passed on, and her two sons had married women from this foreign land. And later on her sons had died as well, leaving Naomi with her daughters-in-law. And she said, girls, you must go home. It's not too late for you to find new husbands, start your families. But Ruth just would not let her go. She fell on her face and she cried out to Naomi, where you go, I'll go. Where you live, I'll live. Your people are my people now, and your God is my God too.
You don't look like anything like your little baby.
Where you die, I'll die, and I'll be buried there. May God deal with me as harsh as need be,
payas interference? But then for sure it's going to get in the payas. Yeah, but it's going to fall because there's no body to the. Is that better? That's better? Okay.
There we go. So it's connected. So it's pointing towards you now. Try it.
Do we have any? Okay. Hey. Turn it off.
Remember the slide.
They look into each other's eyes, and in unspoken words their love renews the covenant. Where you go, I'll go. Where you live, I'll live. Your people are my people now, and your God is my God too. Where you die, I'll die, and I'll be buried there. May God deal with me as harsh as need be, if ever I leave your side. The seasons change, but not the story. A stranger joins with people that they did not know before. Like Ruth would never leave Naomi, though she could have gone her way. She blessed her to the core. A people scattered to the winds, crying out for God to bring them home again. Another people grafted in, adopted sons and daughters of the God of Israel. After 2,000 years, our veils are removed, as Jew and Gentile are united in the truth. We celebrate the law of God, revealed within it is the coming of Messiah. And by the Spirit of the Lord, all who are joined with Israel sing to this promise.
Shalom chavarim u'mishpacha. Shalom to you, friends and family. Baruchim habayim, welcome. Thanks for joining us here today for our event with Reuven Prager. I know that many of you have seen his presentation. It's always wonderful, and he always has some new things to share with us as well. One of the things that we're going to want for the presentation is for people to sit as close as possibly to each other. And the reason why that is is because we'll be passing very delicate things around, and there'll be less walking around trying to hand things to people. So if possible, if you're able, if you're not sitting close to people, let's see if we can sit closer to each other. Whether that means moving up forward, or just simply moving closer to each other, that's going to make it a little bit easier in general for the presentation.
Is that you or me?
That's probably, are you on right now?
Yeah. Should I turn it off?
Let me just see if that's got left on here. Oh, it did. Got a monitor. All right, as I mentioned before, we're going to see if we can move a little bit closer here. And there are many
I'll move away.
Slicha, ani slech. We have many wonderful things to see tonight, and we are thankful that Reuven Prager is here with us once again this evening. Let's open up in a little prayer. Avinu, we just thank you for this time. We just pray that you'd show us wondrous things from your Torah and about the things from the Beit HaMikdash and the Holy Temple and the things that are not only of the past, but the things that we're looking forward to the future. So Abba, we pray that you hide these things in our heart. Give us insight and understanding as we are hearing these words here today. B'Shem Yeshua Mashiachenu. Amen. And I'll turn it over to Reuven.
Hooray! Yay! How many folks have heard my lecture before? How many haven't? All right, so you guys are going to laugh at my joke. All right. For those of you who are meeting for the very first time, my name is Reuven Prager, originally from Miami Beach, Florida. That's why I can speak English. I've been living in Israel for the last 42 years, and for the last 36 years of that, I've been serving as a Levite on duty, researching and restoring ancient Israelite customs in preparation for rebuilding the Holy Temple. Let me define that. When I say that I serve as a Levite on duty, my father was a Levite, my father's father was a Levite, my father's 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 father was a Levite, all the way back to biblical Levi. Now you remember that when the Israelites entered the land of Israel, the land was apportioned amongst 11 of the 12 tribes. The tribe of Levi, we didn't receive a portion of the land, we received the duty. Our duty was to provide the physical vessels necessary for the spiritual well-being of the people. When it came time to construct the tabernacle, it was the Levites who constructed it. During our 40 years of wandering in the desert, when it came time to move our encampment, it was the Levites who would disassemble the tabernacle, the Levites who would carry it, and the Levites who would reassemble it when we got to our new campsite. When we entered the Holy Land and we built the Holy Temple, if a Kohen, a priest, needed a vessel, it was a Levite who provided it, and if the vessel didn't exist, it was a Levite who created it. We were the doctors, we were the teachers, we were the singers, we were the one tribe that was set aside to minister to the spiritual needs of the people. And in lieu of our service, we were granted the tithe. That 10% that we were commanded to give to the Levites was to free us from worldly pursuit so we'd be available to minister to the spiritual needs of the people. A Levite is in training from age 20 to 25, and from age 25 and on, you're on duty. When I moved from Miami Beach to Jerusalem, it was like switching planets, different world over there. And I had to decide, like, what am I going to do with my life's work? And the more that I learned, and the more that I learned about, specifically about the Levites, I came to realize that this was still a valid job offer. Nobody had ever canceled it. So I chose to serve in my God-given career as a Levite on duty. When I say that I research and restore ancient Israelite customs in preparation for rebuilding the temple, that also needs defining. Whatever we're familiar with is contemporary Jewish custom, normative Judaism, the way the Jews do things today, almost nothing that we do today in contemporary Judaism do we do the way that our ancestors did it. Let me give you an analogy that'll help you understand the nature of my work. Let's say that we have a couple that, God forbid, the husband's in a terrible accident. They put him in a full body cast, covers 93% of his body, just his foot is left outside of the cast. And the doctors come and they tell this couple that this poor guy's going to be like that for 2 whole years. So during those 2 years, his wife learns to care for him and love him through his foot. At the end of the 2 years, the doctors come and they remove the cast, and she continues only paying attention to his foot, ignoring the rest of him. In a sense, that's Judaism today, in case you wonder where I was going with that. 2,000 years ago, when the Holy Temple was destroyed and we were exiled from our land, we lost the ability to fulfill 93% of our religious customs. The 7% of the commandments that we could pack in a suitcase and take with us in our wanderings in exile, that became the focal point for normative Judaism for the next 2,000 years, basically keeping the Sabbath and its related laws, the laws of kashrut, how to eat kosher, honoring your parents, but the other 93% of customs that we could no longer perform for real because the temple had been destroyed and we were exiled from our land, those customs were reinstituted in the first century into a series of what we call in Hebrew zechers, remembrances, so that as we went out into exile, we'd be able to remember what our ancient customs were, so that when the generation arose that merited to return to the land of Israel, we'd remember how to restore our ancient customs. Let me give you a practical for example. Book of Numbers, chapter 15, verses 37 to 41. God commands Moses to bid the children of Israel to put fringes on the corners of our garments throughout our generations. You guys are all familiar with the talit, right? This group, you should all be familiar with the talit. For the last 2,000 years, the way that we fulfilled the commandment of fringes has been by wrapping ourselves in a prayer shawl during the time of prayer. And those of us who would wear our fringes during the course of the day would wear them attached to the four corners of a little undergarment known as the talit katan. Everybody say katan. Katan means small. A little four-cornered garment has holes in the corners we would attach the fringes to, and we would wear these hidden underneath our Gentile apparel. Like if you've ever been to a predominantly Orthodox area, you'll see the guys are walking around dressed like you guys, but coming out from underneath their shirt, underneath their belt, are fringes that are attached to a little four-cornered garment that they have hidden underneath their Gentile apparel. But our ancestors did not fulfill the commandment of fringes on an undergarment or on an artificial prayer shawl. This garment here, this is actually what a talit was before it became a prayer shawl. Some of you might be familiar with this as the seamless garment, woven from the top throughout. Now you'll notice that there are two garments here. You have this white silky garment. In Hebrew it's called a chaluk. In Arabic it's called a jalabia or a galabia. And that was like biblical underwear for the Middle East. Every man in the Middle East wore one of these long bell dress type of outfits. In fact, when you come to visit us in Israel, if you go across the border to Jordan or Egypt, you'll see a lot of the guys are still boogieing around wearing these long bell dress type of outfits. An Israelite would distinguish ourselves by the talit that we wore over our chaluk. And this was the way that we actually fulfilled the commandment of tzitzit, the fringes, from the time that we received the commandment up until the Hadrianic decree of the year 138 that forbade us under penalty of death from fulfilling the commandment. So in the year 138, 139, this garment became a zecher. It became a remembrance. It became a little four-cornered garment that we would attach the fringes to and wear them hidden underneath our Gentile apparel so that we could remember the commandment of fringes, but without getting killed for doing so. But because it says in the book of Numbers, you shall put fringes on the corners of your garments throughout your generations, and it's stretching the imagination to consider this a garment. A garment's something you put on and go out in public and consider yourself dressed, either for modesty's sake or as protection from the environment. So at the time that we developed the talit katan, we developed what became known as the talit gadol. Everybody say gadol. So that when we would meet secretly behind a locked door in the morning for a prayer service, we could wrap ourselves in a piece of cloth big enough to be considered a garment, right? And because the talit that's big enough, it'll cover your torso. And then at the end of the prayer service, we would take the talit and we would fold it up and put it in a bag and carry it out under our arms. Come on. And continue to wear the talit katan hidden underneath our Gentile apparel for the remainder of the day. But before there was an undergarment, before there was an artificial prayer shawl, this is actually what a talit was. So when I say that I research and restore ancient Israelite customs, I take the contemporary custom of exile, the way that we've been doing it for the last 2,000 years, research it, restore it, put it back out on the streets of Jerusalem, and today there's no more Titus or Vespasian or Hadrian over us, these Roman emperors telling us, no, you can't fulfill the commandment. We're back in the land, we're free people upright in our land, and yet so many of us are still only paying attention to the foot. So that's a really long introduction, but that gives you an idea of the nature of my work when I say that I research and restore ancient Israelite customs. 36 years ago, I established a workshop in Jerusalem called Beged Ivri. Everybody say Beged? Beged, like B-E-G-E-D. Beged in Hebrew means garment, and Ivri? Ivri means Hebrew or Israelite. So Beged Ivri means Hebrew garments or Israelite garments, biblical garments. For the last 36 years, my workshop in Jerusalem which is basically me sitting behind an old 40-year-old Singer sewing machine, has been producing a beautiful line of biblical garments for the modern Israelite, so that those of us who return to the land, we can begin to dress and look like we live there. The black hats and the black coats that are associated with Orthodoxy, that's cute and it's nostalgic, but our ancestors did not fulfill the commandment of fringes on a rag hidden underneath Gentile apparel. We wore a tzitzit as a beautiful outer garment. Now, for the most part in Israel today, the guys wear pants wearing public, like all you guys are wearing slacks. Some people are starting to go back to the chaluk, but it's really few and far between, and most of them are real nutcases, right? For the most part, the guys in Israel, it's okay to laugh at my jokes. For the most part in Israel, the guys wear pants wearing public. So I made a modern adaptation of the biblical talit. I call it a tunic. It's the garment that I'm wearing. It's a four-cornered garment, open up the majority of the way on the sides. That's why it comes with a sash, so you're not flapping in the wind. And I make a beautiful line of tunics for all occasions. I have super lightweight cottons for these hot Spokane summer days, and I have heavy, medium. Yeah, it's hot out there. It's like 97 degrees out there today, right? Medium weights, heavy weights for the winter. I have a beautiful line of Damascus silks for Shabbat, for holidays, for weddings, or if you just have good taste. A beautiful line of tunics for all occasions. Now, you know that living in Israel, you're in the army now, right? You live in Israel, you're in the army. I got inducted, go to the induction center, they give me my uniforms, and they expect me to fulfill the commandment of fringes on one of these little dinky things hidden underneath my army uniforms. And I'm Mr. Biblical Garments, right? So what did I do? I took all my army uniforms home, and I redesigned them into four-cornered garments, right? Sewed them closed in the front, opened them up on the sides. I got a religious ruling that zippers are considered open even in the closed position. I got a khaki-colored zipper so there wouldn't be a problem with camouflage. And I tied tzitzit on the corners of my army uniforms. Showed up at the base. What did they do? They tried me for destroying army property. And at my trial, I said, destroyed it. I sanctified it. I make a bracha. I make a blessing on my uniform when I get dressed in the morning. They didn't think it was funny. They thought I was out of my mind. They threw me out of the army. They sent me packing. So I'm home for 11 days, right? I mean, they'd already invested money in training me, right? So they called me 11 days later, asked me if I wouldn't mind coming back and finishing my service. I got back to the base. They ordered me to restore my uniforms to the previous condition. I ignored the order. They ignored me ignoring the order. And I mustered out as a sergeant with tzitzit on the corners of my uniforms. So tzitzit for all occasions. Never did do a day of reserve duty. I don't know why, though. I guess they had enough soldiers. Right. So you'll notice that the garment that I'm wearing, excuse me, happens when you get here. Yeah. You'll notice the garment that I'm wearing and all the garments that I offer include the required biblical blue fringe. Any Hebrew speakers here, Hebrew class grad, do you speak Hebrew? Can you tell everybody what the word in Hebrew for blue is? Kachol. Everybody say kachol. Kachol in Hebrew means blue. And it's a cha, you got to spit it out from the top of your mouth. Kachol, right? With a lamed at the end, kachol. Kachol in Hebrew means blue. Powder blue, royal blue, navy blue, cobalt blue, turquoise blue, any shade of blue from any dye source. But the Torah doesn't use the word kachol concerning this commandment. It uses the word techelet. Everybody say techelet. And you also have to spit that one out, techelet, right? A particular blue dye. The same way that if I were to say crimson or Bordeaux, that could be any shade from any dye source. But if I say cochineal, you know that we're talking about a specific dye that comes from a specific insect that produces a specific color. So likewise, the Torah was being specific in requiring a patil tchelet, a twist of a particular blue dye. Now, when the Romans, excuse me, I am two-thirds, a little over halfway through an 11,000-mile tour. Started in Miami, went all the way to Port Angeles, Washington, and that, like up until, from the time I left Jerusalem, I was headed to Port Angeles, Washington. Now I'm headed back to Jerusalem. So I'm starting to get the frog in the throat from speaking so much. Ah, that must be it. Right. When the Romans destroyed the temple in the year 70, they didn't just want to beat us on the spot. They wanted to make sure that we didn't come back and reestablish ourselves in the land. How did they accomplish that? As they took us out into exile, they separated between generations. Keep in mind that up until the destruction of the Second Temple, our traditions were strictly an oral tradition. We pass our traditions down from mother to daughter, from father to son, from generation to generation. The Mishnah had not been written yet. Talmud hadn't even been conceived of. We passed our traditions down orally from generation to generation. When the Romans took us out into exile, they separated between generations so that we couldn't pass our traditions down to the younger generation, so that younger generation would not maintain a longing to come back and reestablish themselves in the land. Because when you remove the people from their traditions, they lose their indigenous connection with their land. And we lost many of our traditions in the first century, one of which was what was the dye source for the required biblical blue fringe. Now, our ancestors told us that the tchelet, the required biblical blue, came from a marine source as opposed to the plant world that they referred to as the chilazon. The question for the last 2,000 years has been, what was the chilazon? They didn't give us a Latin name to identify it by, but they gave us 11 different characteristics describing its body shape, its environment, its movement. And based on those 11 characteristics, in 1887, one of the great sages of Europe, Rabbi Gershon Henoch Leiner from the city of Radzin, left his village, went down to the Mediterranean, and spent 2 years researching everything that lives along the Mediterranean coastline until he came to the conclusion that he had positively re-identified the chilazon as a species of squid, Latin name Sepia officinalis. You all know what a squid is, right? Like a little octopus, it's got 8 tentacles, which sort of correspond to the 8 fringes of the tzitzit. So Sepia officinalis has 2 blood sacs. One is its lifeblood, one is a black blood that it uses as a camouflage when it's being chased in the water. It spritzes this ink into the water that creates a cloud that allows it to escape from its predator, which, by the way, is the function of tchelet for mankind. Because it says, "Uritemoto," you shall see it and remember. It's like if I decided that after flying all the way from Tel Aviv to Miami, drive all the way from Miami to Port Angeles, all the way from Port Angeles to here, instead of coming here and sharing words of Torah with you tonight, I leave my nephew at the hotel and I'd go out and do something dumb, go to a pub, get drunk, and as I'm running to do something stupid, my tzitzi get caught in the car door, or they get caught in the bumper between cars as I'm running to do something dumb, right? And as I reach down to extract them, I see the tchelet. And they ask in the Talmud, what color is tchelet? What color is blue? They answer, well, it resembles the sky. They go, yeah, but what color is that? They say, well, it resembles the sea. They go, yeah, but what color is that? They say, well, it resembles the sapphire. And they ask one last time, yeah, but what color is that? They answer, it resembles the kisei hakavod, the holy throne of glory that God sits upon is made of tchelet. It's made of this blue. So as I'm running to do something dumb and my tzitzi get caught and I reach down to extract them and I see the tchelet and I make the association, God's throne, God's presence in my life, my commitment to live by his commandments, it creates that cloud that allows me to escape blowing it spiritually. So the same way that the ink saves the physical life of the squid from its predator, tchelet saves the spiritual life of mankind, as it says, "Uritemoto," you shall see it and remember, not run after your eyes and after your heart, which can lead you astray. Since 1887, the Radziner Hasidim, the followers of Rabbi Gershon Henoch Leiner, have continued to produce the required biblical blue fringe. And if you already have a prayer shawl or a garment and you only have the white fringes on it, you can now acquire a set of these. You'll notice on the back of the packaging, where's the set of tchelet right now? Okay. Make sure that it gets from you to that guy so it can pass forward, right? You'll notice on the back of the packaging it says free tying instructions at begadivri.com. We have the best guides available anywhere in the world, 9-page fully illustrated guides. You can work off your computer screen or print it out and have it in front of you. 9-page fully illustrated, geared for someone who's never tied tzitzit before, that you can successfully retie your garment or your prayer shawl, including the required biblical blue fringe. Now, to be fair, in the last century, there were 2 other opinions of what the chilazon was. Rabbi Herzog, who was the first chief rabbi of Israel, when he was a young man in England, he wrote his doctoral thesis on the required biblical blue fringe, the source for the biblical blue, and he came to the conclusion that this snail, the Jantina jantina, that this was the chilazon that the ancients had spoken about. He never succeeded in extracting a dye from it, and truth be told, it's not a shell that's ever been used by any culture for dyeing. It does emit a secretion, but it won't take to fiber. And he recanted his opinion in favor of Radzin prior to his passing away. I'm going to pass this around. When you receive it, please receive it open-handed, because the shell doesn't weigh 2 grams and it'll crush in your hands. And maybe we'll keep it out of the hands of the little kids, right? Jantina jantina. Very interesting snail, and if we can work it out so that the stuff goes from you to him so that you don't have to get up each time because there's 100 things coming around, all right? So figure it out so that you're the last person in your group that gets it and pass it on over to him. Thank you. Jantina jantina is a very interesting snail. It builds itself a raft of bubbles, and it spends its entire lifetime bobbing up and down on the surface of the ocean. There's a third group in Israel that's been producing a blue dye for the last 24 years from this snail called the Trunculus murex. Trunculus murex. And we're going to speak more about this one in a moment. This one's a hardy shell. This one won't break. Throughout the Torah, there are three colors that seem to have a spiritual significance. The first of which that we spoke about at length was the tchelet, because it was required for everybody's tzitzit. There was a second color called argamon, biblical purple. And biblical purple was produced from the second snail coming around, the Trunculus murex. This is raw wool dyed with biblical purple argamon. There you go. There's a third color called tolat shani. And tolat shani was a crimson produced from the back of insects that live in the bark of oak trees in the Galilee, in northern Israel. And what they would do is they would take these insect backs, dry them out, crush them up. They would make a dye batch. They would take the wool, prepare it with what's called a mordant, which is a substance that opens the cellular structure of the wool to allow it to accept the dye. And this is raw wool dyed with tolat shani, biblical crimson. These three colors, blue, purple, and crimson, were used initially for the drapings of the tabernacle. They were used in the priestly garments. Now, this is not a priestly garment. This is a lay Israelite talit that any of us could wear, but it is woven in the colors of the priestly garments, blue, purple, and crimson. And of course, when we built the Holy Temple, there were two chambers. You had the outer chamber called the Holies, and the inner chamber called the Holy of Holies, separated by a double curtain known as the Parochet, also woven out of these three colors, blue, purple, and crimson. One last word about ancient dye stuffs. They teach in the Talmud that in the latter Second Temple period, there were some folks who weren't so honest. They weren't so scrupulous. And they figured, the tchelet, it's so much more expensive to produce than any other dye. Maybe they can make a phony tchelet. They can make a knockoff, make a quick buck, a quick shekel, right? And in the Talmud, they call a phony tchelet, they call it kla ilan. Kla ilan was wool dyed with indigo from a plant source, as opposed to the tchelet, which came from a marine source. Much less expensive to produce, and it was indistinguishable to the eye. Looking at it, you couldn't determine whether or not you had the real McCoy or not. And from that teaching, we learned that whenever you acquire tchelet, you get it from a God-fearing source, somebody who's considered knowledgeable in tchelet. What I'm going to pass around right now, this is genuine counterfeit tchelet. You guys don't laugh. Wow. Okay. Any questions about anything I've covered so far? Biblical garments, commandment of tzitzit, or biblical colors? Yes. Not to my knowledge, no. But it's an expression that everybody understands. Yeah.
Did you get a decent amount of people wanting to debate you about that? The tchelet is supposed to be more of a purple color.
No. No. Argamon is argamon. Tchelet is not argamon. Blue is not purple. No. If anything, there are those who say it's more green, like sea green, more like sea blue green kind of thing. Yes. Black? You mean like black stripes in a talit? In the tzitzit? If you're wearing a black garment, then you would wear 7 black strings and one of tchelet. See, it used to be that whatever the color of the garment, that was the color of the other 7 tzitzit. So if you wore a green garment, like I have some funky tie-dyes on the table there, and the tzitzit are dyed the color of the tie-dye. And they're the coolest tzitzit you ever saw. If you're wearing a green garment, just make a pile, because there's 100 things coming. This I'll take because it'll crash. But if you can, there's like 100 things coming. Do you need another chair? Okay, so make a pile there, would you, of all the stuff? Thank you. Right. So if you're wearing a green, right, like in other words, if you were wearing a green shirt, you would have worn 7 green tzitzit and 1 of tchelet. If you wore a brown shirt, you had 7 brown tzitzit and 1 of tchelet. If you were wearing a black shirt, you'd wear 7 black tzitzit and 1 of tchelet. If you're just making black tzitzit on a white garment, that's whatever. It's, there's nothing. Any other questions about anything I've covered? Yes? There was a test. There was a test that you could submit your tzitzit to find out if you had the real McCoy or not. There was a test. There was a chemical test. Yeah. Cool. The second project we took from thought to physical reality was to restore our ancient marriage ceremony. You all familiar with Jewish weddings? We get married, we stand under a chuppah. So let me show you how we really do it. On the day of our weddings, we crown our brides with a Jerusalem of gold bridal crown. It was known as the Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. And every bride in Israel would be crowned on her wedding day with a Jerusalem of gold bridal crown. This is what our brides look like, once again, crowned with the Jerusalem of gold bridal crown. It was known as the Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. And every bride in Israel would be crowned, and you did not walk to your wedding, but rather you were carried like a queen on a royal wedding litter known as the Aperion, A-P-E-R-I-O-N. Biblical source is the book Song of Songs. You might know the Song of Solomon, chapter 3, verses 9 and 10, where it describes the wedding litter made for King Solomon's wedding. I don't know if King Solomon made 1,000 of these or used the same one 1,000 times. A little biblical humor there. Well, are you guys tired? You know? I mean, I've spoken for like straight up, I don't remember what sect it was, but like none of them even smiled, right? Are you guys are you shell-shocked or tired?
You're so intriguing.
Ah, okay.
Every word.
Right. Anyway, so all right. So I mean, all right. All right. So every bride was carried on an Aperion, and you were carried not to the chuppah. The only reason I'm not handing it to you is because you got cookie in your hands, and I don't want cookie on the pictures, right? You were not carried to the chuppah, but rather to the chuppat chatanim, or the canopy of bridegrooms. You see this dome-shaped crimson silk and gold wedding canopy? For the last 2,000 years, our chuppah was a zecher, was a remembrance. We often used a flat cloth, we used a talus. It wasn't a talus, it was a kippah. It was a dome made of pure crimson silk with fine beaten gold work. It was known as the chuppat chatanim. Now look carefully at this photograph and you'll see it clear when it comes around to you. You'll notice that at this wedding, the couple got to the wedding hall, they took one look at our chuppah and they said to themselves, haven't seen a chuppah look like that for 2,000 years, we better hedge our bets. So they strung up a chuppah of exile underneath the canopy of redemption, which shows you the difficulty in the nature of our work. First you have to research this stuff out, then you have to restore it, then you have to go convince everybody that what you've restored is real. Because tradition. We got so used to that flat cloth talit form of chuppah that we lost sight that was instituted as a zecher, as a remembrance to remind us what a chuppah really was. Now, when I was bringing this project from thought to physical reality, I knew I needed a team of carriers. You see these guys in the blue and gold? These are Jerusalem's royal litter bearers. You had to be 6 foot to 6'5". It's an ad that I took in the Jerusalem Post, ran for 6 weeks. You had to be 6 foot to 6'5", bearded, permanently living in the land of Israel. You would have been hired right away, right? Actually, a bunch of you would have been hired. You would have been hired. You would have been hired, right? You had to be 6 foot to 6'5", permanently, and you too, probably. I think you got the height, right? You had to be permanently living in the land of Israel. You had to be the magus, the heavy machine gunner in the infantry units, the guys that carried a Belgian mag, 50 caliber Rambo. I needed big, strong guys, right? You had to have a strong sense of theatrics and be looking for an extra income. 44 men replied to the ad. Youngest was 18 years old. The oldest was 73 years old. I mean, he was tall enough. He was cute, but he was scrawny. I needed bulk, right? I chose 10 guys out of the 44, put them through 2 weeks of basic training on the roof of my building with Ms. the bride until they learned how to pick it up together, turn left together, turn right together, because you don't want to dump the bride, you know? These guys are really hot, Jerusalem's royal litter bearers. For those of you who are already married, so you shouldn't feel left out, if you have a significant anniversary coming up, your 10th, 15th, 20th, 25th, 30th, 40th, 50th, you still love her? Bring your bride to Jerusalem. That's just to see who's still listening. Bring your bride to Jerusalem. We will crown her with the Jerusalem of gold bridal crown, carry her through the streets of Jerusalem on a royal wedding litter to the accompaniment of shofar blowers and harpists, and we'll recreate a biblical wedding for your anniversary celebrations. Any questions about anything I've covered so far?
Yeah, what's the price tag?
This project we registered in Israel as a nonprofit organization, and for the locals, we've never turned anybody down for lack of money. We charge $1,500 to do a wedding, right? Which is $1,500 for the bridal entrance, right? For our part of the thing, and we come with the Jerusalem of gold bridal crown and the Aperion and the chuppat chatanim. 7 of Jerusalem's royal litter bearers, includes 2 shofar blowers and a harpist, right? And for the locals, you know how like sometimes you have a couple where the parents of the bride don't like the groom and they ain't coming to the wedding, right? We had a couple brought to our attention that both sets of folks ain't coming to the wedding. And never, these guys didn't have a nickel between them, right? So, you know, and they were brought to our attention. I called all the guys. Of course, everybody volunteered the time. We volunteered the equipment. They actually got married in Bnei Brak on the other side of the country, so we had to schlep all the stuff from Jerusalem to Bnei Brak. The wedding hall was the roof of a 3-story building, so we had to get all this stuff up in the, you know, onto the 3rd floor. But it's a wedding that's still talking about 16 years ago. 16 years later, it was the most joyous occasion you ever were at. And they didn't pay a shekel. They didn't have a shekel, you know. But if you're coming from abroad, so it's just another plane fare, you know. It's not a lot, $1,500. Any other questions about anything I've covered so far? In the Holy Temple, there were 2 altars. There was an outer sacrificial altar, and there was an inner altar called the golden altar or the incense altar. And it was rather small. It measured a cubit by a cubit by 2 cubits high. A cubit is about 50 centimeters, which doesn't mean anything here either. About yay big by yay big by yay big high. It was made of a solid piece of acacia wood overlaid with gold. And every day, twice a day, a priest would go out to the outer sacrificial altar with a pure silver fire pan, a silver shovel. And he would take a shovel full of burning coals from the outer sacrificial altar, bring them into the temple, transfer them into a gold fire pan that would then be placed on top of the golden incense altar. A 3rd priest would come in carrying a 2-handled vessel known as the bezich. This is a vessel made out of solid gold restored by the Temple Institute in Jerusalem in 1992. And the priest would come in carrying this 2-handled vessel. A 4th priest would come and open it up, take a handful of a powder mix that was a compound of 11 different spices. No KFC jokes, please. 11 herbs and spices. All right, I got half a chuckle. Right? He would take a handful of that powder mix, drop it onto the burning coals, and a pillar of smoke would go straight up and out through the inverted windows of the temple. Now, you know, we build a building, we put windows in to let the light in, let the heat in. The temple windows were inverted. They were designed just the opposite. They were designed to let the light and the heat and the energy out. And they teach that at the moment that the priest would drop this incense powder onto those burning coals, and that pillar of smoke would go straight up and out through the inverted windows of the temple, that the goats in Jericho would sneeze. Not all laughing. How many have been to Israel? All right, next time I come through, I want to see every hand up. You got to put your feet where your faith is, people. Come visit us over there, right? So Jericho is down like by the Dead Sea, the lowest point on earth. Jerusalem's up on a mountaintop. They teach that women as far away as Jericho did not wear perfume because of the smell of the incense emanating outwards from Jerusalem was so strong in the air, you wouldn't have smelled perfume on your skin as far away as Jericho. I'm going to share with you now the 11 original ingredients that were compounded into that incense mix that was burnt twice daily in the temple. And when it comes around, just take the stopper out, take a whiff, pass it on. This first one coming around, my favorite, is Shemen Tsori. It's also known as Shemen Afar Simon. In English, it's known as balsam. It's the most celebrated of all biblical spices. Next one coming around is Ktsia, in English, cassia. This one's going to remind you of Red Hots. Remember Red Hots when we were kids? Take a mouthful, burn your face off, Red Hots? So I used to think that Red Hots were made out of cinnamon. They're not. They're actually made out of cassia. It's a much stronger species of cinnamon, and it's the first of 3 different forms of cinnamon incorporated into the incense. Next one coming around is Levona, or frankincense, which is very often mentioned together with? All right. I'll ask that question, get no response. I'm like, uh-oh, wrong group. Happened once in St. Charles, Missouri. I couldn't get out of there quick enough. This is myrrh. Myrrh. Now that's followed by cinnamon, which is cinnamon from the leaf, as opposed to the cassia. This is the second of 3 forms of cinnamon incorporated into the incense. That's cinnamon. Next one is shibolet nard. Shibolet nard is spikenard. Some of you have a verse, they washed his feet in spikenard. This is spikenard. That's followed by tziporin. Tziporin in Israel is clove. And that's followed by klufa. Klufa is aromatic bark, which is cinnamon from the bark as opposed to cinnamon from the leaf and as opposed to the cassia. This is the 3rd and final form of cinnamon. That's followed by karkum. Karkum is saffron, very popular as a spice on chicken in Israel. Saffron. The names are written on all the bottles. Let me finish this first. Now, for those of you who have never attended my lecture before, this next one is a new smell that you've never smelled in your life, right? In Hebrew, it's kosht. In English, it's called kostus, C-O-S-T-U-S. And it cost us a fortune to find it. Kostus. Now, this last one is called chelbana. Let me have everyone's attention for a moment. This last one is called chelbana, in English, galbanum. This one does not smell good. This one comes to teach us that amongst every 11 of us, there's one who stinks, but you have to include him. Yeah, right. Can I continue while those are coming around? Yes. Aftinas, right. So, like forever until the temple was destroyed. Can I continue while they're coming around? Yeah. So there's a very strict biblical prohibition. I need everybody's attention for this. There's a very strict biblical prohibition against preparing the incense in powder form according to specification for any use outside of the temple. And it's one of these lightning strike you dead out of the sky prohibitions. The reason we provide this as an essential oil is because as an essential oil, it is invalid for use in the temple. Has no use whatsoever, which allows us to use it outside, like we're doing now in an educational setting. And also for those of us who are Sabbath observers, you know that we usher the Sabbath out with a blessing over a fragrant spice. Most folks just use cinnamon powder or clove. If you own a set of these, it'll add 5 minutes more to your Havdalah ceremony, and when you finish, take a whiff of the room, you'll have a little hint of what Jerusalem smells like during the time of the temple. Now, the reason we provide these as an essential oil is because we're taught not to be a stumbling block before the blind. Are you guys all familiar with the Jerusalem syndrome? Anybody not? It's a bona fide psychological disorder that affects one out of every thousands of people that comes to Israel. They get to Jerusalem and they go God crazy. The Arabs call it majnouni, a majnoon. I get that people who don't know me see me to go majnouni, right? You have no idea how many times I have outfitted John the Baptist. You think I'm kidding? If you wake up in the morning in Jerusalem, you're now King David, you end up at my door to get outfitted because I'm the only guy in Jerusalem making biblical garments, right? So I didn't want to provide the ingredients in any form that could be brought down to powder. So if you wake up in the morning, you're now like the high priest, you know, right? As an essential oil, there's no way to bring it down to powder. And because we're taught not to be a stumbling block before the blind, I didn't want to provide it in any form that could be brought down to powder. You guys all know who Vendell Jones was? Anybody not? You know who Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark is? Yeah. All right, so there's a problem with the educational system in this country. Indiana Jones character is based on a real-life dude, actually a real dead dude, he just died a few years ago, named Vendell Jones from Arlington, Texas, who spent the last 3 decades of his life searching for the lost Ark of the Covenant. Most of the major biblical discoveries of the last 3 decades were made by this man, Vendell Jones. Do you remember that amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was one scroll written in copper, the copper scroll, because it was meant to survive? Vendell translated the copper scroll and used it as an instruction manual to try to locate the hidden vessels from the time of the temple. 1992, he's working a cave in the vicinity of Qumran, down by where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, that's referred to today as the Blue Cave. They got to the cave, they cleared out the cave, they removed the floor stones, and they found underneath 600 kilos of prepared powdered incense mix. 600 kilos, a year's supply of prepared powdered incense mix. Do you have any idea of the significance of that find? There are 243 species of myrrh. We now know which one was used in the incense. It was a mega discovery. He calls Rabbi Goren, the chief rabbi of the state of Israel in 1992, who came down from Jerusalem with an entourage of rabbis, and Vendell asked for permission to burn a minute amount of this incense powder to see if it was still viable. Now, if you've ever been down to the Dead Sea, you know that the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea because it is dead as a doornail, right? The salt content of the water is so thick, the salinity is so thick that nothing could live in the water. In fact, it's so thick that nothing could live around the water. The area is blighted. The only thing that live down there are flies, millions of them. If you ever try to camp out at the Dead Sea, you got to bring netting. So Rabbi Goren and the rabbis came to Vendell's campsite. They burnt a fingernail's worth of this incense powder, and for the next 60 days, there was not a bug or a fly in their campsite. Turns out, besides being God's desired smell, it was a fumigation system. Don't tell Orkin, right? But we're taught that one of the miracles of the temple was all the animal sacrifice, all the slaughtering going on, there were no flies. It created the world's first no-fly zone. Got you all right. I knew I'd get you on that one. Any questions about anything I've covered so far? That one, right? Bubba boom, right? All right. Our next restoration takes us to the book of Exodus, chapter 30, verses 11 till 16, where God commands each of us to give as an atonement for our soul back to God half a shekel of the holy shekel, which weighed 20 gerah. If you take one piece of information away from my talk this afternoon, let it be this, or this evening. Anywhere where the Torah, anywhere where the Bible speaks about shekels, it is never, ever referring to money. The shekel was not a currency, it was a weight. The same way that an ounce is broken down into grams, GR, shekels broken down into gerah, GR. There are 20 gerah to the shekel. Now, before I continue, I do things differently than a lot of communities in America. I pass around a plate of money for you guys. It goes over better in some groups than others. All right, we got that, all right. On this tray, you have 5 items. You have a small stone weight, which is a genuine 4 gerah weight from the 7th to 8th century BC, I should say from the 8th to the 7th century BC, from the first temple period, from a period in the world before there was the concept of money. The concept of money was introduced to the world only in the 6th century BC in Persia, today's Iran. The concept of money did not make its way to the Holy Land until the 4th century BC, introduced by the Greeks. So this is a 4 gerah weight. There are 20 gerah to the shekel. So this is 1/5 of the shekel's weight from the 7th to 8th century BC, from the first temple period, from a period in the world before there was the concept of money. You have 2 silver coins on the tray. The smaller silver coin is a genuine half shekel minted in Jerusalem in the year 45, 0045. We're in the year 2019. In the year 45, this coin was minted in Jerusalem and had passed through the treasury of the Second Temple up to 25 times. Coin was minted in the year 45. The temple was destroyed in the year 70. It existed for 25 years prior to the destruction and was reused year after year to fulfill the commandment. If somebody held it in their pouch for 2 or 3 years and it only went 22 times through the treasury of the Second Temple, this coin itself went up to 25 times through the treasury of the Second Temple. The larger silver coin is a genuine shekel minted in Jerusalem in the year 18, 0018. This coin passed the treasury of the Second Temple up to 52 times. When those money changers tables were thrown over, this coin could have been on them. It existed, right? Here's the rule. The holiday of Purim. You're familiar with Purim, right? I got to tell you a Purim funny, right? I do two tours a year. I do a summer tour and a winter tour. The summer tour I complete and get home right before Rosh Hashanah, and the winter tour I complete and get home right before Purim. So my mother has a 3 Shabbos policy. If I'm in the States, I got to be home for 3 Shabboses. 1 in the beginning of the tour, 2 at the end of the tour. So the winter tour several years ago, you know, like finish it up in February, right before Purim, and I'm home in Miami, and I need a bottle of kosher wine for Kiddush, for Shabbos, for Friday night, right? So I go to the Big Daddy's Liquors on 94th and Harding. They have a whole wall of kosher wines, right? I live in a, like a from area. Like now it's a from. When I grew up, there was nothing, right? So I walk in there to get a bottle of wine. The guy takes a look at me, goes, "You Jewish?" I don't know how I figured it out, right? But he says, "Can I ask you a question?" And I brace myself because here I am. I'm walking into a liquor store. And the guy's like, "Can I ask you a question?" I'm like, uh-oh, here it comes, right? He says, "What's the name of that holiday coming up where all the Jews drink?" I said, "You mean Purim?" He goes, "Purim?" Like, Purim, another one? It's a true story. It really happened, right? And he got it right away, Purim. I'll never forget it, right? So Purim is the holiday we begin to give the half shekel. What happens on Purim if you don't have half a shekel? All you have is a whole shekel, and you need change of half a shekel. So then you had to pay the money changer the money changer's fee, which consists of the 2 little bronze coins on this tray. In Hebrew, they're known as prutot. You might know them as the widow's mites. You paid 1 prutah for the half shekel you were giving, and 1 prutah for the half shekel you were getting back in change. Just like today in Israel. Thank you. The banks charge you to. Oh, there's one coming around. There's one missing spice. Anybody? Not the galbanum. not the gum, not the costus, not the aromatic bark. Clove. Someone's sitting on a clove somewhere. Please do find it. Okay. Did it make it into this basket, maybe? No? All right, we do need to find that clove, because... Okay. Okay, I can't do the next lecture without it. We got it. Very cool. Okay, great. All right, no problem. Thank you. All right. So, anywhere where the Torah speaks about shekels, they're never referring to currency, they're referring to weights. And Israelite weights were always made out of stone, never out of metal, because stone cannot contract or impart ritual impurity. And since what you're giving over to the temple had to be given over in a state of ritual purity, the weights themselves that you weighed your nugget against had to be ritually pure. They had to be made out of stone. You'll notice that they were flat on the bottom so that they didn't roll off of the scale. They were dome-shaped, very often inscribed with their weight value. Like you remember, before there were digital scales, you'd go to the jeweler to buy a bracelet, to sell your gold bracelet. He'd put it on one side of a scale, then he'd put a 10-gram weight and a 5-gram weight. This is the way that we fulfilled the commandment of giving the half shekel during the entire period of the tabernacle, the entire period of the first temple, and 100 years into the second temple era was by weighing silver nugget against stone weights. And not only this commandment, but any commandment that required payments of shekels of silver, like the 5 shekels of the redemption of the firstborn, or the 50 shekels of the bride's price, or even the 400 shekels that Abraham paid for the cave of Machpelah in Hebron for a burial site. He didn't whip out a wad of bills and count out 400 shekels. They weighed 400 shekels of silver bars against stone weights. This was Beged Ivri's collection of First Temple period weights as of a few years ago. I've since just about completed the set. You remember we have an injunction to have honest weights, not to have a heavy set to sell by and a light set to buy by. This is what they're referring to. And once again, this was the way that we fulfilled the commandment of giving the half shekel during the entire period of the tabernacle, the entire period of the first temple, and 100 years into the second temple era was by weighing silver nugget against stone weights. In the 4th century BC, the Greeks conquered our area, and the Greeks introduced the concept of coinage for the very first time. And for a period of 400 years from the, for a period of 200 years, from the 4th century BC up until the 2nd century BC, we began to fulfill the commandment of giving the half shekel using Greek silver shekels and half shekels, known as didrachma and tetradrachma. In the 2nd century BC, the Romans beat the Greeks. The Romans are now the empire, and the Romans operated 2 mints in the Middle East, one in the city of Tyre, T-Y-R-E, in Lebanon, and one in the city of Antioch in Syria. The mint in Tyre produced Tyrian shekels and Tyrian half shekels of a 95% silver purity between the years 127 BC and the year 19 BC. In the year 19 BC, they closed the mint in Lebanon, transferred it to Jerusalem, and from 18 BC up until the year 65, these coins were minted in Jerusalem specifically to fulfill the commandment of giving the half shekel. In the year 65, we rebelled against Rome. One of our first active rebellions was to make our own independent coinage. No more face of a foreign god on the front, no more eagle on the back. We made our first revolt shekels and half shekels. And how did we date these coins? We didn't date them from creation, and we didn't date them from a Gentile calendar. We dated the first year's coin, Shin Aleph, Shana Aleph, the year 1 of the liberation of the land of Israel. Shin Bet, Shin Gimel, Shin Dalet, Shin Hey, the years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the liberation of the land of Israel. And of course, we lost that war. The temple was destroyed, and that was the end of that. Briefly under Bar Kokhba, we minted coins once again for 3 years, in the years 132, 133, 134, dating those coins, Shin Aleph, Shin Bet, Shin Gimel, the years 1, 2, and 3 of the liberation land of Israel. We lost that war as well, and that was the end of the history of the half shekel for the next close to 2,000 years. We're going to jump ahead to Purim of 1996. What happened on Purim of 1996? Hamas, our peace partners, blew up a bomb in Dizengoff Center on Purim morning, killing 13 people, most of them children in their Purim costumes. On Purim. You all know what Purim is, right? Most joyous day of the Jewish year. What was their goal? Their goal was to steal our joy on that Purim, and they succeeded. They blew up that bomb on Purim morning. The entire house of Israel worldwide went into mourning on the most joyous day of the year. Just like, what happened last Shabbos in El Paso, right? It affected everybody, Shabbos, if you heard about it, right? Now, I waited to hear from our leadership, our political leaders, our religious leaders. We're told we have to continue with the peace process, but nobody dealt with the spiritual attack perpetrated that day against the house of Israel. And when you're facing a scenario like that, we're given the Bible to look into for answers. We find in the book of 2nd Chronicles, during the days of King Joash, you might know him as Joash, you know what I'm referring to? During the days of King Joash, the spirit of the people was particularly low. The temple had fallen into disrepair. People had stopped coming up to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festivals, and King Joash was minded to raise the spirit of the people of his day. How did he choose to do that? He turned to the Levites and he said, go out and restore the custom of giving the holy half shekel. And for the first time in my ancestors' history, we blew it. We didn't act. He calls in Yehoiada, the high priest of that year, yells at him, I told Levi to restore the half shekel, get to it, go do it. And they did. And everybody gave in their half shekel. And what do we read in the text? Vayismachu kol hasarim v'kol ha'am. And all of the government ministers and all of the people rejoiced, which comes to teach us, if you want to restore rejoicing to the entire house of Israel, the way you do that is by restoring the custom of giving the holy half shekel. 1 year to the day of the bombing, Purim of 1997, the first pure silver holy half shekel in 1,927 years hit the streets of Jerusalem. And if it was their goal to steal our joy on that Purim, we're going to restore it 10,000-fold by restoring the custom of giving the holy half shekel. And if you're an Amen or Hallelujah saying group, that's all Spokane's got, huh? Man, oh boy, we're in trouble. Now, this coin that was minted on Purim of 1997 as a response to the bombing was actually minted to be used for the very first time the following year on Purim of 1998. How did that get there? Okay. Is there anything else floating around that didn't make it all the way around? Oh boy. Okay. This coin that was minted on Purim 1997 as a response to the bombing was minted to be used for the very first time to actually fulfill the commandment the following year on Purim of 1998. Why the 1 year delay? Because when you give the half shekel in fulfillment of the commandment, it goes from being a piece of silver to what we refer to in Hebrew as hektish, sanctified property. And sanctified property is some serious stuff. Like, who's got the coins? Young lady that has the coins there. Would you take the large silver shekel, put it in the palm of your hand, close your hand around it? You feel the coolness of that coin in the palm of your hand? Thank you. If that coin was in a state of hektish, if that coin was in a state of sanctification, and that young lady was feeling hot, and she put that coin in her hand and felt its coolness, she would be liable for misappropriation of sanctified property because she received benefit from hektish, the coolness in the palm of her hand. That's how integral it is. The half shekel is the one commandment that teaches absolute fiscal integrity in religious money matters. There's no shenanigans with the half shekel. So to be responsible, I couldn't just start distributing coins and tell people willy-nilly to send them into Jerusalem without creating the infrastructure for a safe and secure collection process. That took a year to establish. So this coin that was minted on Purim of 1997 was minted to be used for the very first time to fulfill the commandment the following year on Purim of 1998. How did we date this coin? We didn't date it from creation. We didn't date it from a Gentile calendar. We dated this coin Shin Nun, Shana Nun, the year 50, because 1998 was the 50th year of Jewish sovereignty over the Holy Land, the 50th year of the state of Israel, and that's how Israelites date our coins. Featured on the obverse on the front of the year 50 coin is a prophetic 10-string Davidic lyre, L-Y-R-E. You remember that throughout the Torah, throughout the Tanakh, there are two types of harps mentioned, the nevel v'kinor, the harp and the lyre. The harp being a 22-stringed instrument, and the lyre, L-Y-R-E, in the first and second temple was either a 7 or an 8-stringed instrument. Our prophet said in the third temple era, it would become a 10-stringed instrument, no longer referred to as the kinor. They would refer to it as the asur, from the word eser, from the word 10 in Hebrew. The house of Harari, biblical harp makers, who restored harp making to Jerusalem, when they learned that, they immediately left off producing the 8-string lyre and went right into production of the prophetic 10-string Davidic lyre, restored by the House of Harari Biblical Harp Makers in 1983. The year 51 coin for 1999 features the apirion, the royal wedding litter that we just learned about, that we carry our brides on their wedding day. The year 52 coin features the bezich, the two-handled golden incense vessel restored by the Temple Institute in Jerusalem in 1992. The year 53 coin features the Neville, the 22-string Davidic harp restored by the House of Harari Biblical Harp Makers in 1984. Now, if you know how to play your Neville, if you know how to play your harp, the 22 strings of the Neville correspond to the 22 letters of the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. So you can literally play your prayers. Can you imagine what Shema Yisrael sounds like on a harp? You can play it, right? The year 54 coin features the Jerusalem of Gold bridal crown, restored by Beged Ivri in 1991. The year 55 coin for 2003 was the 20th anniversary of the restoration of the biblical talit, so we honored that by placing that on the year 55 coin. The year 56 coin features the Chupat Chatanim, the canopy of bridegrooms, that dome-shaped crimson silk and wedding canopy, and gold wedding canopy, restored in 1992. The year 57 coin features the two silver trumpets restored by Gershon Solomon in the Temple Mount Faithful. These were the two silver trumpets that were used to announce Rosh Chodesh and New Moon. And what we're doing every year is we're issuing a half shekel that features on the obverse, on the front of the coin, a vessel that has already been restored to physical reality for the Third Temple era. Not a wannabe or a wish list, but something we can photograph and point to so that these coins can be used not only to fulfill the commandment, but to reintroduce all the various vessels being restored by the different temple organizations. The year 58 coin features a vessel known as the Hatavat menorah. You remember in the temple there was a big 7-branch menorah? So this is the vessel itself made out of solid gold that was used to clean out the cups and replace the wicks in the 7 cups on top of the 7 branches of the menorah. The year 59 coin features the chest for new shekels. The chest for new shekels. And I'll explain that in just a moment. The year 60 coin. In the year 2008, the Temple Institute completed a first draft of the high priest's outfit, and because it's made up of 8 different components, we decided to spread that out over 8 different coins, starting with the Hoshen, the breastplate of the high priest's outfit. The year 61 coin features the silver fire pan that was used to bring the burning coals into the temple for the daily offering of the incense, also restored by the Temple Institute in the 1990s. The year 62 coin features a new version of the prophetic 10-string Davidic lyre based on a Bar Kokhba quarter shekel from the Second Revolt from the year 132. So you have Second Temple and Third Temple instruments on the same coin. The year 63 coin features the silver wine decanter used to pour out the wine libations at the base of the altar, also restored by the Temple Institute. The year 64 coin features the golden pitcher that was used to replace the olive oil in the 7 cups on top of the 7 branches of the menorah, also restored by the Temple Institute. The year 65 coin features the chest for new shekels. The chest for old shekels. The year 59 coin was the chest for new shekels. This is the chest for old shekels, and I'll explain in a moment what that's all about. The year 66 coin features the tzitz, the frontlet that the high priest wore over his forehead, made out of solid gold, said Kodesh LaHashem, holy to God. That's the second component of the high priest's outfit to make it onto a coin. The year 67 coin features the tribal flag of Levi. In 2012, I restored my tribe's flag. And let me show you what it looks like. My tribe's flag is described as 1/3 white, 1/3 black, and 1/3 red. Very un-Jewish colors. Right? It took me a long time to get used to it. Right? And it says that it's embroidered in the center with the Urim and Tumim. Now, we don't know what the Urim and Tumim were or what they look like, but we know they were deposited into the Hoshen, into the breastplate of the high priest's outfit. So I made a full-size flag. I made a desktop size, and for Levites only, the lapel pin. That's the year 67 coin. I have my parents' ketubah with my father's name, Yosef ben Yaakov Halevi. I've been able to trace it back like 5, 6 generations. You know, as long as you have some proof. If you have your parents' ketubah, their wedding document, and your father's listed as a Levi, then you're a Bad Levi. You know? The year 68 coin features, and this is the only one that doesn't have its number on the back of it. These are the temple flutes that were wooden flutes that were played by the Levites during the singing of Hallel on Sukkot during the Feast of Tabernacles, restored by Shiloh flutes in the village of Shiloh. The year 69 coin was the 20th anniversary of the restoration of the holy half shekel, so we honored that by placing the holy half shekel on the holy half shekel. And we did a restrike of the year 50 coin with the new date, year 69, and a different reverse. Last year's coin, the year 70, features the menorah itself, the golden menorah that the Temple Institute has completed in Jerusalem. This was last year's coin, and this year's coin, drum roll, features the tunic, the garment that I'm wearing. Now I gotta tell you a funny story about this, right? How do I make a coin? I take the artwork and I take it to the mint, right? And they have an artist that takes my artwork and turns it into a master die, right? The old school, what they used to do, like when we first started making coins 22 years ago, 23 years ago, they would take a big plaster disc and carve it out by hand, right? They carve like what the coin's going to look like. Now they do it on computer, right? So I go to the mint with the artwork. I decided that this year's vessel is going to be the tunic, and I did a beautiful sketch of it, and I gave it to the woman who deals with my account, and I said, you know what, take your cell phone, take a picture of me wearing my tunic, right, so that the artist can get a 3D, can see what it is that he's sketching out, right, because he's never seen one of my tunics before, and even though I thought my sketch was pretty good, right, take a picture anyway, can't hurt, right? So rather than use the artwork, he cuts off my head, cuts off my hands, right? And in fact, if you know me, you can see me, right? The only problem was that when he sent the artwork back for the master dies, it had this big belly. I look like I'm 9 months pregnant. I can't use that on a coin. You gotta fix that, right? He slimmed it down some more, slimmed it down some more. So that's this year's coin, the tunic, right? It was the funniest thing. My eyes popped out. I can't use that on a coin, right? Now, this is a year 50. It's the truth, right? I'm having so much fun with Judaism over in Jerusalem, you guys. You have no idea, right? This is a year 50 coin. Has a different reverse. Anybody recognize this logo in the back? Call it out. It's a logo of the Israel Defense Forces. Why did we make a parallel series of coins with the reverse of the Israel Defense Forces? Because the half shekel was and is primarily a soldier's commandment. Every other commandment in the Torah, literally every other commandment in the Torah, we begin to fulfill as responsible adults at bar mitzvah age 13 and bat mitzvah age 12. What age do we begin giving the half shekel? The age of 20. Why the age of 20? Because the age of 20 was the age of induction into the army. What was the half shekel? It was the world's first insurance policy. It was an insurance policy for your soul that you gave on the day of induction to the army, that if during your service you caused harm, that harm did not tarnish your soul because of the half shekel you gave as an atonement for your soul on the day you were inducted into the army, right? We set up a program over 10 years ago called Machatzit Shekel L'Chayal, half a shekel for a soldier. You guys can now sponsor soldiers in the Israel Defense Forces. You know, we're sitting here in Spokane, Washington, and we hear about the young men and women who are serving the Israel Defense Forces, protecting the people of Israel and the land of Israel, and your hearts go out for these young people, right? And you want to do something for them. What can you practically do from Spokane, Washington? Am I pronouncing that right? Right?
Spokane, yeah.
Not Spokane, right?
That's
Spokane,
Spokane,
right?
yeah.
Right, I've learned. Right? What can you practically do from here in Spokane, Washington to help a soldier in the Israel Defense Forces? One thing you can do is you can go to www.pizza, like a pizza pie, pizza IDF, Israel Defense Forces, pizzaidf.org, and a piping hot large pizza and ice cold 2-liter cola will be delivered to a group of soldiers at a roadside checkpoint somewhere in Israel. And they deliver. The guy who runs the program, his name is Menachem Kucher, longtime immigrant from Australia. He was my webmaster, which is why my website hasn't been updated in over 10 years. It's a dinosaur, right? Because he's now one of the largest purveyors of pizza in Israel. You remember in the Second Lebanese War, 2006, they forgot to bring food for the soldiers? PizzaIDF.org delivered over 8,000 pizzas into Lebanon to feed these poor kids, right? So you can provide for their bellies, make them big and fat like me, or now you can provide for their souls. You buy a coin, we hand it to a soldier for free, right? And you can sponsor one soldier or two soldiers, 5 soldiers. As a community, you can sponsor an entire army base. You buy the coins, we hand them to the soldiers for free. Now, thus far I've spoken about the ability to fulfill the commandment of giving the half shekel. Buying the coins is not fulfilling the commandment. Giving the half shekel is fulfilling the commandment. How do you give the half shekel? In the time of the temple, there were 13 chests for the collection of funds. 2 of those chests were for shekels. One chest was called new shekels, and one chest was called old shekels. This is the chest for new shekels. This is the chest that if you merit to be in Jerusalem on Purim, and you've acquired a coin, you go up to the chest, make the bracha, make the blessing, drop the coin into the chest. As soon as it enters the airspace of the chest, it becomes hektish, it becomes sanctified property. You have now fulfilled the commandment of giving the half shekel for this year. There was a second chest called old shekels. What are old shekels all about? Old shekels are for makeup years, for years in the past that you had not had the opportunity to fulfill the commandment. For instance, in 1998, when I gave the first half shekel in my life, I was 39 years old, which means from the age of 20 to 38, I hadn't had the opportunity to fulfill the commandment. When we dedicated and gave over the chest for old shekels, I went and I deposited 19 coins into that chest, counting out my ages, 20, 21, 22, all the way back up to 38, bought back all of the years that I had missed in the past, and every year hereafter, 1 coin goes into the chest for new shekels. What is the spiritual message of the holy half shekel? What is the holy half shekel really all about? We're taught concerning this commandment that the rich shall not give more and the poor shall not give less. First thing comes to mind when you hear that is rich and poor in pocket, right? The people who give the most money to the synagogue or the church, they get the pews up front with the little name taggy things, right? That's what it was, like Temple Emmanuel, Miami Beach, they had the little name taggy things, right? And the poor people were lucky to be standing in the back. Very often in Jerusalem, us religious characters, we have a tendency to consider ourselves spiritually wealthy, and we look upon secular and non-observant people as being spiritually poor. The half shekel comes to teach us that that person who is so far from God in his own eyes, and I say in his own eyes because none of us are far from God, we're a breath away, but that person who is so far from God in his own eyes that he'll only check in for like a nanosecond between bites of a bacon cheeseburger on Yom Kippur kind of guy. Now, for those of you not laughing, we're not allowed to eat bacon cheeseburgers, and for sure not on Yom Kippur. It's a fast day, but that person is at least a half a shekel. And the biggest rabbi in the biggest Rebbe's chair is only half a shekel. Equals cannot hate equals. You can only hate somebody you think is worth less than you. If you acknowledge that the person opposite you is at least a half a shekel and you're only half a shekel, you can't hate each other. We're taught that the second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. What is baseless hatred? It's when I consider myself a whole shekel and you're now worth a widow's mite. Equals cannot hate equals. It's the ultimate manifestation of the equality of each and every one of us before God and before man. And that is the spiritual message of the holy half shekel. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less. Let me complete this section with this last teaching. In the second year of the restoration of the half shekel, 5 minutes after Rosh Hashanah, after Jewish New Year's, I get a phone call from a young rabbi named Yachad Witt. Calls me up all out of breath. He goes, Reuven, he goes, you're not going to believe it. And he was right, I didn't believe him. He comes to me the next day, and he brings a book he had been studying over the holiday called Orchot Chaim, The Ways of Life. It's a compendium of teachings of a 10th century commentator that we refer to as the Rosh. He writes, 1,000 years ago, you shall not diminish from giving less than half a shekel every year at one time. In other words, you cannot fulfill this commandment by giving a quarter shekel now and a quarter shekel next month. You have to give in one clip, one shot, once a year. So you know how a Jewish text works. You have the text, then you have the commentary on the text, then you have the commentary on the commentary of the text, and the commentary on the commentary of the commentary of the text, Jewish stuff, right? So this first commentator that we refer to as the Tosfos Yom Tov wrote this some 370 years ago. He writes, referring up to the text, Machatzi shekel b'kol shana, half a shekel every year. What's he referring to? And his answer, which I have highlighted here in orange, in the text itself is actually in parentheses, which is strange enough. He answers, Shehu b'shavi chetzi Prager kesef. It's the equivalent of Prager silver half shekel, which means nothing in Hebrew, but my name is Reuven Prager, and I just restored the custom the year before. So this young rabbi goes, what do you think this means? And I'm looking at it, I was like, well, obviously, right? He goes, he goes, what do you think it really means, right? So I wrote to my mom, I said, Mom, we found a rabbi who defines the half shekel as being the equivalent of Prager silver half shekel. She goes, great, get his mailing list. Any questions about anything I've covered? All right, two last things before I close. One is a book came out last year, written by a woman named Rivka Lambert Adler, PhD. She's an Orthodox woman, lives in Jerusalem, in Ma'ale Adumim, and she wrote a book called 10 from the Nations, Torah Awakening Among Non-Jews. It's written by you guys. If you haven't gotten it yet, it's a must-read. It's a very interesting read. In fact, I didn't find out about it until she'd already completed the text, and I was like, how did you not consult with me? Because I've been the tip of the spear for the last 30 years teaching these communities, right? And it turns out that finally she heard about me, so I ended up doing the actual proofreading, and I got all the typos out and everything else, but it had already been written. But it's an amazing read. It's got something that'll piss off everybody. It's a really good thing. Now, this last thing I want to share with you is, it takes a lot of chutzpah. You all know what chutzpah is, right? No? Chutzpah. Gumption's a good word. I don't know, can you say cojones here? I don't know. It takes a lot of gall, right, to do what I do, to take something that's been dead for 2,000 years and bring it back to life, right? And you really, really, really need to know what you're talking about when you're doing it, right? Like, for instance, before I minted my first half shekel, I owned a complete set of weights, almost complete set of weights from the First Temple period, and an almost complete set of coins from the Second Temple era, so that when someone would come to me and say, you don't know what you're talking about, I do, because I literally own the knowledge. I own the knowledge. I literally own the knowledge of it, right? And I have to get to that level before I restore a project to physical reality. And so in my research, like, I've already completed a first reading of the entire Babylonian Talmud. I've completed Midrash Rabbah. I'm two-thirds through the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud right now, and I'm using art scrolls, the Schachtenstein edition. It's an excellent, right, with commentary and translations, right? And twice a year they have a sale, right, where, like, on Hanukkah and Shavuot, where it's like 30% off of the tractates in the Talmud, and I order them and have them shipped to my parents' house, and when I come in for my tour, I pick up the new tractates, right? And what my research has been about is every time I find something that used to exist that doesn't exist today, I open a file, right? And as I find more information about it, I add it to the file, And one of the projects that I've wanted to do for the last 30 years was to restore our ancient calendar, our ancient way of doing the calendar. And my file is like this thick, and the more that I learned about it, the less I understood it. Could not wrap my head around. I never owned the knowledge of the calendar. A year and a half ago, for Thanksgiving, my kid brother asked me if I wouldn't mind coming and house, dog, cat, bunny sitting for him so he could take his family on a cruise for Thanksgiving. Now, as it happens, for the last 25 years, I've hosted the largest expatriate Thanksgiving dinner in Jerusalem. Up to over 50 people, 2 turkeys. I cook one on Wednesday, one on Thursday. It's a schlep to, kind of thing. So when my kid brother says, hey, can you come and house, bunny, dog, cat sit for us, for Thanksgiving, so we're going to cruise, I was like, yeah, I'm in. I don't have to cook this year, right? So I ordered from Art Scrolls the next tractate, and it was delivered to my folks' house, the tractate Rosh Hashanah, New Year's, right? And they have now direct flights, Tel Aviv, Miami. I get there on a Wednesday. I open my mail, get the tractate. On Thursday morning, we live waterfront on Point Lake, and that's where I do my studying in the backyard. And I open up the tractate, and I read the introduction, and I turn the page, and I read the first line of the first sentence of the first Mishnah, the first chapter of Tractate Rosh Hashanah, and pwah, I got the whole concept, right? Introducing Luach HaMelech, the king's calendar, the first biblically correct calendar ever produced for the Third Temple era. Our contemporary Jewish calendars go from, the calendars we have today go from what month? What month do they start? Tishrei, right? Rosh Hashanah. They start for Tishrei. Like from September, they go from Tishrei to Elul, right? What month of the year is Tishrei? It's the 7th month. What's the first month of the Hebrew year? Nisan, right? This is a Nisan to Adar calendar, the first biblically correct calendar ever produced. Now, not only did I do that, but I brought down all of the dates that are relevant for the Third Temple era that do not appear on contemporary calendars. For instance, 1st of Nisan, New Year's for kings, New Year's for shekels, New Year's for festivals, New Year's for vows. Does that appear on any of our contemporary Jewish calendars? Not a one, right? The entire calendar is like that. I brought down every date that exists during the time of a temple era that does not appear on a contemporary, bless you, on a contemporary Jewish calendar. Now, this is a Nisan to Adar calendar. This is last year's calendar. We had 2 months of Adar last year, right? So I'm coming into the 2nd month of Adar, and I'm looking, I still got a stack of a couple of hundred of these calendars at home, right? And then it hits me that what this really is, this is a template. This is a template. Because what happens on the 1st of Nisan happens every year on the 1st of Nisan, right? In other words, whoever bought this calendar last year had to use it in conjunction with another calendar because there's no Gregorian dates on this calendar, right? It's Hebrew and English, but it doesn't jive up with a Gregorian calendar. So anyway, anybody who used this last year had to use it in conjunction with a regular, with a regular contemporary calendar. And what it is it's a template, right? Now the days of the week won't jive, right? And we brought down also, like if this month is Meiser Sheni, if it's second tithe or poor tithe, and where, what year of the Shemitah cycle it is won't jive. But it's a template that is good for this year, next year, 100 years from now. What happens on the 1st of Nisan happens every year on the 1st of Nisan. So I'm offering it as a template, last year's calendar, which is great. Can you imagine selling last year's calendar, 2018 calendar? Who's going to buy that, right? But they're selling like crazy. It's a template. Anyway, I support my ministry from the work of my hands. I make everything on the tables. There's a table of artwork. There are 2 single mothers in Tzfat in northern Israel that do beautiful artwork, have no access to market, so we want to bless them also. So please buy everything on the table so my nephew doesn't have to pack up. Thank you once again for inviting me, and thank you for listening and laughing at least one of my jokes. So. How do you get this off?
All right, guys, make sure you check everything out on the table. Just a little echo there. And for the purchasing, Reuven, right, Reuven, of the items, they come see you or come see your nephews? Okay. Okay, they're already over there. Baruch Hashem. All right, and if they want to write check out, they should make it out to
Reuven Prager.
Reuven Prager.
R-E-U-V-E-N, and it's written on a couple places on the table. Reuven Prager.
All right. Thank you, ready, guys. Coming tonight. Laila Tov.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your might. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And upon these two commandments stands the whole law. Love your neighbor, love your God. Ve'ahavta, ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך
About a few years ago, I walked into a store and I picked up some random tape of Nigunim. And it's kind of those moments where you just pick the right thing, you choose the right thing to buy. I brought home a tape with me, which really shaped me a lot, gave me mamash nuchius. I was davening with this tape for a few years. Only later did I realize that this tape, this voice, that's really carrying me through so much, is the voice of a friend of mine, Zayda, a friend of mine's grandfather. I want to dedicate this song, Leilui Nishmas, Reb Shmuel Betzalel Althaus. da 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 da, di da do 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 do, di di da lai, di di da lai, oi da da, di di do do do, di da do do do, oi da da do, oi da da, oi da da, di da do do do, ya da da da, di di da lai, di da lai, oi da lai, di do ya do do, da da da, oi oi oi, oh. כל דודי הנה זה בא מדלג על הערים מקפץ על הגבעות כל דודי הנה זה בא מדלג על הערים מקפץ על הגבעות באתי לגני אחותי חלה אחותי חלה באתי לגני אחותי חלה אחותי חלה כל דודי הנה זה בא מדלג על הערים מקפץ על הגבעות כל דודי הנה זה בא
Holy, holy, holy Lord. Holy, holy, holy. You are awesome. Come and fill this place. You are awesome. God of mercy, God of righteousness, God of salvation, fill this house, oh Lord.
Yeshua is the light that drives out the darkness. The darkness must flee from the presence of Hashem. Yeshua is the light that drives out the darkness. The darkness must flee from the presence of Hashem. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. The darkness must flee from the living word. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. Yeshua is the light of the world. He came to the world, confounding the darkness. His word is a light, a lamp for our feet. He came to the world, confounding the darkness. His word is a light, a lamp for our feet. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. The darkness must flee from the living word. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. Yeshua is the light of the world. Yeshua is the light that drives out the darkness. The darkness must flee from the presence of Hashem. Yeshua is the light that drives out the darkness. The darkness must flee from the presence of Hashem. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. The darkness must flee from the living word. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. Yeshua is the light of the world. He came to the world, confounding the darkness. His word is a light, a lamp for our feet. He came to the world, confounding the darkness. His word is a light, a lamp for our feet. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. The darkness must flee from the living word. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. Yeshua is the light of the world. His light now shines, the darkness must flee. The darkness must flee from the living word.